Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a very special episode of the Metal Meltdown, because today we are talking about the top 10 worst metal albums of 2022. That's right, there were so many albums that were so terrible that this year, for the first time ever, we have expanded our top 5 into a top 10. Grab your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen, buckle in. We're in for a bumpy ride, hence why I bought some booze. Alright, let's get this over with. Alright, so here's how it's going to work, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to talk about 10 albums that I feel are the worst of 2022. I am going to talk about them in order of release. This is not a ranked or numbered list, much like a lot of other lists that are featured here on the Metal Meltdown. I will be talking about albums that came out earlier in the year first, albums that came out later in the year last. I will let you know if there is a number one worst album of the year when we arrive to it. And finally, just a reminder that I am not an expert, nor do I claim to be. I am not God, and my word is not law. Music is subjective. We are all allowed to have our own opinions. If you disagree with me, good, fine, go for it. If you happen to enjoy one, or two, or three, or four, or multiple, or all of the albums featured in this video, please continue to enjoy them. Good for you. But don't think for a moment that having a little tantrum is going to change my mind, because it won't. Better and stronger and smarter men and women and others than you have tried, and they have failed in glorious fashion. You don't stand a chance. Now that that is out of the way, let us talk about the top 10 worst metal albums of 2022. I don't really have any honorable mentions, per se. I would have if this were a top 5, but it's not a top 5, so I don't. That being said, I will give a bit of a shout-out to Mainstream Sellout from Machine Gun Kelly. It is not a metal album. It's, depending on who you ask, barely a rock album, but we did talk about it here on the Metal Meltdown, and it is, regardless of what you would call it, one of the worst albums of the year. Basically, Machine Gun Kelly spends 40 minutes romanticizing toxic and harmful relationships, bitching and moaning about how real punks think he's a fake punk or whatever the fuck, you know, just kind of waving his dick around, being a gigantic egomaniac, all while throwing out some of the tackiest lyrics, some of the worst riffs, some of the worst melodies I think I've heard on any pop punk or pop rock record in recent memory. I guess congrats are in order, though. Machine Gun Kelly did manage to make an album so terrible that I felt the need to talk about it on the Metal Meltdown. A non-metal artist made an album so horrifying and so bad that I felt the need to mention it in my top 10 worst metal albums video. Let's be real for a moment. That's a little bit of an accomplishment. Good job. Applause all around, Machine Gun Karen. You did it. Oh, sake was a good choice. Alright, getting into the actual top 10 now, we have Requiem from Korn, released February 4th via Loma Vista Recordings, and Concord, the forefathers, the pioneers, the poster boys for nu metal and 90s alternative metal, have returned with a brand new studio album, and quite possibly their most boring, their most pathetic record to date. Look, I don't expect metal bands that are like over 30 years old to still be releasing top-tier shit after 30 fucking years. Especially not Korn, who frankly have had a very inconsistent career, despite, you know, being for the most part a bit of a one-trick pony. A one-trick that, might I add, you know, brought them fame and notoriety in the 90s with records like their Self-Titled and Follow the Leader and so on and so forth. We've reached the point, though, where watching that pony do that one trick is just kind of sad. You know, it's got arthritis, and its knees, and its back, it's all fucked up to hell, and, you know, it moves really slow, and it just doesn't really have the same enthusiasm and pizzazz and passion that it had doing that one trick 30 years ago. Like, these have to be some of the most unremarkable, some of the most simplistic, predictable, some of the most unenergetic songs I think I've ever heard Korn deliver in my life. They sound like they are sleepwalking through this album. The production doesn't help either. Everything has the weight, the impact, the heft, and the muscle of, like, a stack of soggy wet crackers. Everything is just kind of soulless, empty, heartless, stale. Even Jonathan Davis isn't really bringing a lot of, like, power and energy to this, you know? He just sounds tired. He sounds spent. I understand the last couple of years have been really rough for him, but, like, at least he was able to kind of use that to his advantage on an album like The Nothing. Here it seems as though he's just done. He has mentally clocked the fuck out. Everything that made Korn so iconic in the 90s has just been so painfully and aggressively stripped away from them on this album, and it's just kind of pathetic to watch. I would argue that The Path of Totality is still Korn's worst album overall, but this is probably their most boring album. Next up, we have the Fundamental Slimes and Humors from Nekrogoblikon, released April 1st via Mystery Box LLC. When I reviewed this album back in April, there were a lot of people telling me, well, you know, Nekrogoblikon is just goofy. They're just wacky. They're just silly. They're just having fun. You don't know how to have fun. You don't know how comedy works. Loser, silly, stupid. And maybe that's true to a certain extent. I mean, here I am making a video called Top 10 Worst Metal Albums of the Year. So there is arguably an argument to be made that, you know, I'm not the most fun all of the goddamn time. But, like, I don't know, call me crazy. I think that you can't just be silly. You also have to make good music. I think it's possible to make something that is comedic in tone and over the top and crazy and wild, and also have it be good. You know? Like, it's not like anyone stands outside a comedy movie and goes, oh, you didn't laugh? That's because you hate fun. Like, maybe the movie just wasn't good, Jeremy. Did you consider that for a second? Maybe the jokes just weren't funny. Maybe it wasn't working. That's how I feel with the Fundamental Slimes and Humors, man. Like, it's just not working. The goblin gimmick is stupid. It's silly. All the weird little tidbits that Nekrogoblikon throws in, it's not doing a diddle darn thing for me. The music is all over the place and incohesive. You'll have these thrashy arrangements and these really melodic, almost kind of melodic metalcore style cleans and anthemic choruses and these really awful clean vocals and these weird keyboard sections, and it's ugly and awkward and strange. It's like trying to put together a puzzle, but all the pieces you've been given are from completely different puzzles. And Nekrogoblikon has just sloppily, like, smashed all the pieces together, fucking threw some goddamn goblin slime on it and said, we're wacky and silly and goofy. Goblin metal. Whoa! The ironic thing is, this album, more so than anything Nekrogoblikon has done before, actually tones down the goblin shtick, you know? Like, there are less jokes and less wacky lyrics overall here. It's just what is here is just so poorly done, and everything else is also just so poorly done. At least with older albums, I could giggle, I could chuckle. I didn't really do that once here, and if the goal is to be silly, to be wacky, to be comedic, and for me to leave it, having experienced and seen zero comedy, you've kind of failed. Next up, we have Scoring the End of the World from Motionless in White, released June 10th via Roadrunner Records. And, wow. Where do I begin describing this cringe fest of epic proportions? I will concede that of all the albums we're talking about in this video, this is probably the least horrible and the most competently put together. Like, there are actually songs here. There are actually melodies and ideas that are clearly communicated. But also cringe. Just cringe. Just cringe. Some of the most obnoxious, bombastic, annoying, hot topic, cyber goth metalcore I've ever heard. It's edgy and corny to the point of being nauseating. The production on this is horrible. Even on a remarkably low volume, I feel as if my brain is being beaten to a pulp with a spiked baseball bat by producer Drew Folk, who just, like, really despises people with healthy eardrums. You've got a ridiculously sappy power ballad through Masterpiece. You've got, like, the hilariously, like, over-the-top kind of political rager via Red, White, and Boom. It's just too much. It's just too much, man. This whole album just has me, like, consistently rolling my eyes. I guess if for whatever reason you dreamed about a potential collaboration between Marilyn Manson and Ice Nine Kills, maybe this would do it for you. But I have never had such a dream. Only such a nightmare. And yeah, cringe, bad, no thank you. Next up, we have the Great Heathen Army from Amon Amarth, released August 5th via Metal Blade Records. Yikes. Yeah, it's your dad's favorite melodic death metal band is back with their most one-dimensional and their most predictable collection of basic bitch mellow death heavy metal ragers imaginable. I mean, it's just weak. It's just soft. All the fire and the thunder and the fury and the brutality of older records, you know, of Surtur Rising, Twilight of the Thunder Gods, it's gone. And in its place, we have the kind of jams that, like, my fucking 60-year-old dad probably would have fucking put together after hearing death metal for the first time ever. I mean, the last few Amon Amarth records weren't outstanding, but at least they had a few riffs here and there, a few choruses that could kind of grab your attention. Here, I feel as if I've just been served the same microwaved meatloaf and mashed potatoes for, like, the 12th night in a row, and I'm just kind of sick of it. It just kind of feels like they've run out of tricks, they've run out of ideas, you know, the Viking gimmick has run its course, but we've defined ourselves as a Viking metal band, literally a Viking death metal band, so now we're kind of stuck doing this. It's not, like, offensively terrible or anything like that, but much like the aforementioned Requiem from Korn, it just kind of bored me and did absolutely nothing to wow me. There are some death metal bands that really can get away with making the same album over and over and over again, and it can still feel fresh and it can still feel exciting. Cannibal Corpse, The Black Dahlia Murder, Aborted, Amon Amarth are simply just not one of those bands. Plain and simple. And the Great Heathen Army is fucking proof of that. Next up, we have Afterlife from Five Finger Death Punch, released August 19th via Better Noise Music. It should not be shocking to see Five Finger Death Punch on this list. They have pretty much consistently been one of the worst metal bands out there right now in the modern scene. Afterlife doing absolutely nothing to change that, you know. It's the worst elements of, like, Nickelback, Godsmack, and Pantera thrown into a blender with, like, a slew of toxic masculinity and some of the most cliche riffs and hooks and lyrics you've ever heard in your life. It's just over-the-top, post-grunge, butt rock, radio metal cringe. It's Five Finger Death Punch doing what Five Finger Death Punch be doing. Ivan Moody spends a good chunk of the album whining and moaning and bitching and picking fights like some kind of prepubescent snothead living in a trailer park in middle America. Everything is, like, aggressively chunky and beefy. It's very loud and it's, like, super compressed. These guys have never been especially innovative or technical or progressive, but I mean, there's just nothing going on whatsoever in the music department here. There's definitely an argument to be made that this is their most generic and basic and simplistic record to date in that regard. This album is so bad that I kind of feel like even the Five Finger Death Punch stans aren't really digging this. Like, when I put up my review for this album, I fully expected, you know, the usual rage that follows when daring to criticize Five Finger Death Punch. But instead, I got messages from a lot of people who were like, yeah, this album's kind of mid, bro. Yeah, it didn't really do it for me. Like, there were people who were lifelong fans saying, yeah, this motherfucker's spitting. This is not up to par. This is not great. And I mean, that kind of says it all right there. I mean, these are the band's most loyal and ardent defenders, and even they're not really feeling this. I mean, look, Five Finger Death Punch clearly still doing okay for themselves. They just did a massive North American tour in the summer with Megadeth, of all people, opening for them. So clearly whatever pushback that this album is receiving is not seriously damaging the band, but it is at the very least showing that, you know, the once iron grip that this band had on modern rock and metal is beginning to loosen. And honestly, thank God for that. Thank fucking God. All right, we're at the halfway point of this bad boy, so let's have a drink. Why not? We deserve it. We've made it this far. We can do this. Hang in there, brother! Or sister. Or whomever. Is there a gender-neutral term for sibling? Come to think of it, sibling would probably be the gender-neutral term for sibling. Hang in there, sibling! I swallowed an ice cube. That was a cold ice cube. My teeth hurt. Alright, so next up we have not one but two albums. We have Eat the Flame and Demondelic, two brand new, separately released studio albums from Synner, the brainchild of one Jeremy Spencer. These were released, again, as separate albums on September 10th? Independently, that much I know. That much I remember. I mean, like, no major label is gonna release this fucking garbage. September 16th, my apologies. If we're gonna talk shit, we may as well do so correctly. Synner. We've talked about Synner plenty of times on the Metal Meltdown. We talked about them when they were called Psychosexual, and they released an album called Torch the Faith back in 2020. We talked about them again when they changed their name to Synner last year, and then released 9 studio albums on one day in November 2021. And we talked about them again less than a year later, 10 months later to be exact, when they dropped Demondelic and Eat the Flame. What an adventure it's been with Synner. Jesus Christ. Congratulations are genuinely in order, ladies and gentlemen, because not only are these two albums, Eat the Flame and Demondelic, terrible for all of the usual reasons that a Synner album is terrible, but they are, together, the worst metal albums of 2022. They will share the #1 spot together. And bravo to Jeremy Spencer, the first person to receive the Worst Album of the Year award 3 years consecutively from the Metal Meltdown. Wow, what a fucking accomplishment. I'm being genuinely kind of serious here. Like, Jeremy Spencer is so bad at his job that nobody else even comes close. Like, he has the work ethic of Devin Townsend, or Buckethead, or King Gizzard and the Wizard Lizard, or Steven Wilson. He's able to cram out so many different records and work on so many different projects. The difference is, unlike all of those bands we just mentioned, Jeremy Spencer and Synner completely lack talent. These albums are cringe. These albums are silly. Some of the most obnoxious, juvenile, horrifyingly, hilariously terrible butt rock and heavy metal you've ever heard in your life. Some of the edgiest lyrics, some of the worst hooks, some of the worst production. One of these albums, I can't remember which one off the top of my head, thank you Sake for that, even features a mashup of Killing in the Name of from Rage Against the Machine and Bad Moon Rising from Creedence Clearwater Revival. And it's horrible. It's bad. It's really awful, and it made my ears bleed, and it sounds like something that would have been axed from the DJ Hero soundtrack, and then also locked in a vault at the bottom of the sea. And by bottom of the sea, I mean bottom. Like, you need to wear some kind of special suit in order to get that motherfucker. Call fucking Namor or Aquaman to pick that shit up. It might honestly be cheaper and easier. Jeremy Spencer, once again, acting out all of his weird rape and sexual assault fantasies because that's a cool, normal thing to do. You know, telling people they should kill themselves and jump off a fucking bridge. He spends a good chunk of these albums whining about cancel culture because why not? That's the hot ticket that, like, rock stars love to bitch and moan about nowadays. It's just so fucking lame, bro. It's Psycho Synner. Do I really need to go into excruciating detail about why Jeremy Spencer and Psycho Synner are still releasing terrible music? Do I really need to do that? I've already done that enough fucking times. I don't feel like I need to do that again. So yeah, Eat the Flame, Demondelic, both these albums, terrible. Psycho Synner out of 5, just insulting, disgusting garbage. Yikes. Once again, congrats though, Jeremy Spencer. Congrats on, for the 3rd year in a row, releasing objectively, inarguably, unquestionably, the worst music I've ever heard in my fucking life. That's honestly amazing. Alright, cool, great. Next up, Cycle of Contempt from Razor, released September 23rd via Relapse Records. This one hurts, not gonna lie. I wanted so badly to like this record because I love Razor so much. One of the most underrated, underappreciated metal bands of the 1980s, a monumental force in Canadian speed and thrash metal, responsible for classic records like Armed and Dangerous, Evil Invaders, Violent Restitution. This is also their first studio album in like 25 fucking years, and on top of that, we just need some great thrash metal. Like, it has not been great as of late for thrash metal, not in my opinion at least. I mean, there's been some decent records here and there. Like, I enjoyed Megadeth and Municipal Waste a lot. I thought the new Creator was pretty solid. Zentrix had a pretty decent record as well, so did Toxic, but like, I don't know, thrash metal's gotten so stale, so generic. You know, you need a band as cutthroat as Razor to kind of come back and just give it a good old solid punch in the fucking liver. And, yeah, Razor didn't do that, unfortunately. I accept that thrash metal, you know, it has to look and sound a certain way, otherwise it's not thrash metal. So I'm not going to chastise this record for being generic, for being a very stereotypical kind of thrash metal release, for relying on a lot of tropes of thrash and speed metal. I'm instead gonna give it shit for just being really, really, really poorly, terribly produced, and just being for just being really fucking goofy. The guitar tone is awful. Like, it sounds like a chainsaw cutting through an amp. The drum sound is so flat. It literally sounds and feels like the most cheap-ass programmed drums imaginable. The type of shit I could probably buy right now for like $50 fucking online and have immediately installed on my laptop. If there is a real fucking drummer, then Jesus Christ, they did that motherfucker dirty. Either that, or he's literally a robot. The production here is noisy and ugly and clumsy and awkward. I think the idea was to make it sound like a more produced version of like a classic thrash metal bootleg or like a live album, but it just sounds bad. It just sounds really, really, really terrible. Almost unlistenable at times, and Jesus Christ, what is up with those vocals? A lot of like incessant barking and all these exaggerated accents and impersonations. Like at one point in the closing number, you know, he literally sounds like he's doing a really, really piss poor impersonation of like Macho Man Randy Savage. It's just so dumb, and it's painful because this should have been so easy. All you had to do was whip out some razor-sharp riffs, pun semi-intended, with a lot of anger and a lot of fury, produce it semi-competently, and you know, that would have been it. That would have been fine. Instead, Razor dropped what is very likely the worst album of their career, and one of the worst thrash metal records I think I've heard in a long time. I'm tempted to drink more, but, like, I need to get actual groceries after this. Not just, like, vodka and sake and beer. So, yeah, we're gonna stop the drinking there, unfortunately. Feel free to continue drinking yourself, though, especially since we're moving on to talk about the classic symptoms of a broken spirit from Architects. Released October 21st via Epitaph Records, this shows Architects building on the momentum of 2021's For Those Who Wish to Exist, and in the process releasing their worst album to date. It's lazy, it's sloppy, it's generic, it's overproduced to hell and back. Maybe not as bad as For Those Who Wish to Exist, to be super duper fair, but pretty bad nonetheless. The heavier and more progressive aspects of Architect's sound have been officially stripped away in favor of some more simplistic and accessible songwriting, which, in theory, fine. Like, that's not even really the issue. There are plenty of other metalcore bands that have switched up their sound to something more commercial or mainstream and have done so while still releasing halfway decent music. Bring Me the Horizon comes to mind, but Architects clearly not as talented as Bring Me the Horizon, because this is just like a big, boring slob of an album. What's especially disappointing is to see Josh Middleton of Silosis fame still sticking around with these guys and being a part of all of this. If anyone could give Architects a real kick in the ass and have them delivering something with, you know, actual urgency, while maybe still going into this general direction, it's fucking Josh Middleton. But instead, he is playing some of the worst riffs and some of the most uninspired solos and melodies I think I've ever heard on a rock record. Metal Trenches has on a number of occasions described this band as Imagine Dragons core, and I feel like that very appropriately sums up Architects. Like, it's every bit as empty and bland as Imagine Dragons. Like, it's just this big blah of nothing, overproduced commercial rock. To know that this is the same band that once worked on records like Daybreaker, Hollow Crown, The Here and Now, it's a little upsetting. I'm not gonna lie, like, it's a little fucked up. And again, I'm not saying that the issue of this record is that it's a more straightforward kind of pop metal hard rock record. The issue with this record is that it's just badly written and badly produced and badly executed. And finally, let's begin wrapping things up with The Third Eye from Chaoseum, released independently on November 3rd. They are part of the nu metal revival, I guess you could call it, alongside Tala, who we also talked about pretty recently. We actually talked about both of these bands within the past few weeks on the Metal Meltdown. Like, legit, it's funny that these bands release new albums only weeks apart, because Tala is everything I want from nu metal, Chaoseum is everything I don't want from nu metal. It is so unoriginal, it is so basic, it is so stupid, it's so cringy. It's honestly hilarious. Chaoseum just looked at, like, they literally looked at Korn, and they went out of their way to find their most mid and uninspired material, and they said, let's do that, but somehow more mid, more uninspired. Like, it is so derivative. There is not a single original idea or concept presented on this entire album. Very poorly written, very poorly put together, very edgy, very corny, very cringy, at times even bordering on a level of edge and corn and cringe I would expect of Psycho Synner. Everyone wears their heart on their sleeve to a certain extent, and for the most part I would say that's a good thing. Chaoseum wears their heart all over their fucking body to the point where it's kind of obnoxious. Like, these guys are unironically the kind of people that would probably pay top dollar to go to something like Sick New World or When We Were Young. These guys are unironically the kind of people who would probably show up to a party and be like, they aren't playing Korn? Man, that's lame. I bet no one here likes Korn, unlike me. They're very underground. I bet you've never heard of them. I don't know how you somehow make a worse Korn album in a year where Korn released one of their worst Korn albums, but Chaoseum did it. It's a little bit amazing. Just a little bit. Not really, just a little bit. Yeah, I don't have much more to say. Chaoseum ripped off Korn. Like, it's just a giant Korn ripoff, and it's not even a good one. So, yeah. It's bad. It's terrible. Pretty shitty. Okay. And that does it for me. Those were the top 10 worst metal albums of 2022. God damn, I don't know if I should look forward to the comments or not. I always tend to piss off quite a few people each year with this video, even though I try to be kind. With last year's video especially, I thought I was being really generous with a lot of the albums we were talking about. This year, I maybe, you know, I went in a little harder this year, to be fair, so I expect more shitty comments. But whatever, that's the nature of the game, that's the way the internet works, especially with these types of videos, so whatever, I'll take it on the chin, and we'll just hope for the best, prepare for the worst, you know? Thank God I went and bought a bunch of sake and beer and vodka. I guess I'm good to go. Let's go. Let me know what you thought were the worst albums of 2022. Let me know if you think I'm full of shit, if I'm a poser or an elitist or some weird, impossible combination of the two, because, I mean, honestly, depending on who you ask, depending on what time of day it is, depending on what video we're talking about, I'm somehow both. Press this button to subscribe. Look, more end-of-the-year content. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.